Well, welcome to Christian Answers. This is Pastor Jeff Short, your Bible teacher and cultural analyst. And today we're going to be talking about a topic that has been in the news lately, and that is the nuclear weapon, the nuclear bomb. In the movie with the Robert Oppenheimer and the making of the two nuclear bombs that were dropped on Japan. And that phenomenal movie shows the scenes where the bombs were dropped, and it shows the creating of the nuclear bomb. And that is over 70 years ago. It's hard to believe that 70 years ago, the United States dropped two nuclear weapons on two Japanese cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And those have been the only two nuclear weapons that have ever been dropped on a population. And it's amazing. It's actually quite amazing. You would have thought that with so many countries and nations having the nuclear capability of launching a nuclear bomb and weapon on another nation, that they would have done that already. But it's been 70 years and no nation has been crazy enough, insane enough to actually use the nuclear weapon that can destroy an entire city in a matter of seconds, as it did in Japan in those two cities of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So it's amazing. It's actually by the grace of God, I think, as Christians, when we look at 70 years of no nuclear destruction upon any people since those first two bombs were dropped to end World War II, it's nothing short of a miracle that they haven't. Now, the warning and the caution is that just because the last 70 years has not resulted in any kind of destructive use on a population, the warning is that we shouldn't be complacent. We shouldn't think, well, we've got it made. We're in the clear now. No, we aren't. Because actually, statistically, because the nuclear weapon has not been used against a population in the past 70 years, we are that much closer, unfortunately, sadly, we are that much closer to one being used. And I don't think any scientist or anyone who knows anything about this whole subject would say that these things will never be used. In fact, the highest probability is that they will be used. We don't know when. It's just a matter of when they're used. We don't know when, but it's just a matter of statistics that the bomb will be used again on a population of human beings. And thousands, if not millions of people will die. We know that this will happen. And the movie Oppenheimer, when it came out last year, the reason it's so powerful is because it's not a science fiction movie. It's not something that someone came up with, the imagination of a writer or producer or Hollywood director. It's actual historical fact that scientists got together during World War II and figured out a way to blow up an entire city all at once. And that is the scariest part. And what is even more scarier is that now this knowledge, this secret information that they discovered, that is now out. And it's just a matter of time before some rogue nation or some bad actor for financial reasons or for ideological reasons, political reasons, actually explodes one of these on a population again. It's just a matter of time, sadly. So what I want to talk about today is not the movie Oppenheimer. I already reviewed that movie. It is very historically accurate, and it actually shows the inner workings of the team that developed the nuclear weapon that we used against Japan. I'm not going to talk about Oppenheimer today. What I'm going to talk about is a scene that I found on the internet that is from a television show called Fallout. Amazon Prime, I believe, puts this out, and it's the opening scene of that TV series where it depicts a nuclear bomb going off, a number of nuclear weapons going off around Los Angeles. And it's seen from the hills of Hollywood Hills. So here is a situation, I guess it's supposed to be in the 1950s, the late 1950s or early 60s, at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis, I guess maybe, or during the height of the Cold War between the U.S. and Russia. And this scene depicts what would happen if Los Angeles were to be nuked by the Soviet Union. We can only suppose that it would be the Soviet Union at this point in the late 50s or early 60s. There was the Cold War going on, and unfortunately, and it brings this out even in the movie, there was a Russian spy in the form of a British scientist who was part of the Los Alamos team that was developing the first two nuclear weapons that were dropped on Japan. So in the midst of that scientific team developing nuclear weapons was an unknown at the time, a spy for Russia who was able to gather the data from Los Alamos and communicate it to the Russian communists in the Kremlin. And they used that knowledge to develop their own nuclear weapons program, producing multiple nuclear warheads. In fact, they took it even further, and they developed hydrogen bomb, which is even greater kilotons than the conventional nuclear weapons. So this is an all historical fact. It's all historical. And so it was a real possibility at the time in the late 50s and in the early 60s, all the way up until the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union, that America and the USSR would at some point get into a nuclear exchange. And so let's roll this clip of this movie, and I wanted to show you what that might happen, what that might look like, and then we'll explain why, as Christians, we need to trust the Lord and look to Him and cast all our cares upon Him, as the Bible tells us to do, and to be ready for anything. There's a lot of attention given to the nuclear weapons with this movie, Oppenheimer. So let's think about it and process it from a Christian perspective. So let's roll this clip.
All right. I think that's everything.
Why wouldn't you do it? The thumbs up.
Okay, so this guy, a little backstory here, if I'm not mistaken. This guy is a former Hollywood Western star, rodeo cowboy of the Wild West in Hollywood at the time, whether that's in the 50s, I think it's in the 50s. And so for some reason, and I don't know why, he is now performing parties, birthday parties, and he's not a big star anymore, so he must have had something happen that pushed him out of Hollywood. But he was a former famous Western movie star, and now he and his daughter here, little daughter, are doing Hollywood birthday parties for the rich and famous. And so he's in a dialogue with his daughter, and she brings up the topic of why do you hold your thumb out in front of you? And what was he talking about? He must have been explaining that to someone.
Oh, it's grown-up stuff. Well, back when I was in the Marines, they taught us that if they ever drop a really big bomb, they told us to hold up your thumb just like this. And if the cloud is smaller than your thumb, you run for the hills.
And if it's bigger than your thumb?
They told us not to bother running.
Do you think it's gonna happen?
I certainly hope not. But us cowpokes, we take it as it comes, right?
Okay, so he's explaining to his daughter about the principle he learned in the military, he must have been in the military, where the generals said, if you can hold out your thumb and the flash from the bomb is smaller than your thumb, then you head for the hills because there's still time. If the flash is bigger than your thumb when you hold it out in front of you, don't even bother running. It's a nuclear bomb. You're toast. So that's what he was telling his daughter. Now, at the time in the 50s, I think another context is needed. There was a craze by people in the 50s and early 60s to buy these fallout shelters or create fallout shelters in their backyard. And I actually have a relative who had a fallout shelter in his backyard. And the reason why thousands, if not millions of people bought and or created these fallout shelters was because a lot of people, a majority of Americans were really thinking that war was inevitable between the United States and the Soviet Union, the communists. And that now that communist Soviet Union had nuclear weapons and were building more and more and more every day, just as the United States was building more and more weapons every day, that at some point the Russians would try to drop a bomb on the United States. And so people wanted to be ready. They wanted to be prepared. And so they built these fallout shelters. And this was very common in the 50s and the early 60s, even, I would say, even on into the 70s, to have someone in the neighborhood, not everyone, but someone in the neighborhood or people that you knew, to have a fallout shelter. Now, some of them were very simple. They were simply cinder block. You dig a hole in the backyard, put cinder block down as if you were creating a little small basement foundation, and you put concrete on the top, and you have some steps down into it and a door at the bottom, a strong metal door at the bottom. And it's someplace that the family could go if there were a nuclear explosion occurring nearby, and they would be able to avoid the radiation. They might have it stocked with food, certain cans of water and canned goods, just enough to live for a week or two down there without opening the door until the radiation died down. And so this was a reality. This was a reality. Now, you don't see that very much anymore in society. You don't. It's very strange. In fact, if you were to go over to someone's home and they would show you a fallout shelter, that would be very strange. But in the 50s, this was a fear that Russia was going to bomb the United States, or they would have a nuclear exchange. Now, one of the reasons why in the past 70 years that we have not had a nuclear exchange with the old former Soviet Union was because of a doctrine called MAD, or Mutually Assured Destruction. And I'll talk more about that as soon as we see further in the movie. So let's go further into this clip.
Can I have a slice, Dad?
Now, let me see if I can't muscle you up, please.
So it looks like the movie is showing that they're having a birthday party. Everyone is watching a television screen, and nobody is really paying attention or looking out their window toward Los Angeles. This looks like in the hills of Hollywood. So no one is looking out over the city. And they're also taking pictures inside, and there are flashes going off from the big, huge flash bulbs that you used to have to put on cameras. I don't know if you've ever seen those big cameras where they actually literally had a bulb, and you had to put the bulb, like a mini light bulb, into the top of the flash attachment, and this was put on top of your camera, and then when you hit the shutter button, the flash would flash, huge, big flash, and then you had to throw that bulb away because it was already flashed. And so it looks like that's what they're doing here at the birthday party, and they're not paying attention outside the window, and something bad happens.
All right.
Okay, so she sees the flash over the city, and that is depicting what would happen if a nuclear weapon were to drop over a major U.S. city. And she sees it, and just like her dad told her, she put up her thumb in front of her to see if it was smaller or bigger than her thumb, to know what to do, whether to run for the hills or not even bother. And then her dad comes back in and evidently doesn't see that, and he's got his back turned to the city.
One piece of cake coming up from my favorite cowgirl.
Is it your thumb or mine?
That's smoke, Janie. It's just a fire.
Okay, so it's showing the atomic bomb going off over Los Angeles, and this was a real fear. Like I said, in the 50s and the early 60s, I think even into the 70s, it began to wane, and then finally, at the end of the 80s and early 90s, when the fall of the Berlin Wall and the fall of Soviet communism, and we've been living now for 30 plus years in the aftermath of a pretty peaceful situation between the United States and Russia. Now is the only nation left. It's not communist officially either. And so we've been having 30 plus years of relatively peace, and without much of a fear of nuclear destruction on our part. In fact, a lot of the presidents since that time have reduced the number of nuclear warheads and disarmament. So Russia has reduced drastically its stockpile of nuclear weapons, and the United States has reduced drastically its stockpile of nuclear weapons. But we still have a lot of nuclear weapons aimed at locations in Russia, and Russia has nuclear weapons with New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Detroit, Miami, all kinds of targets already pre-programmed into their computer, and those are still there. So even though we have had peace for the last 30 plus years, there is no guarantee that that peace will last forever, and odds are it won't. So we're still at this situation, and that's why a lot of people bought these fallout shelters. And that's why they were really worried and concerned about this doctrine of mutually assured destruction, which basically says if one nation uses a nuclear weapon on another nation, then the nations just throw all their weapons at each other, and it's mutually assured destruction for both of those nations. So if the United States and Russia, even today, under Vladimir Putin, get into a nuclear exchange, it's pretty much over, because then they're going to retaliate, and then we're going to retaliate, and then they're going to retaliate, and then we retaliate. And at some point, you just begin to throw bombs at each other as much as you can. Now, another fear today is that someone like an Iran, who has been working to try to get nuclear weapons, nuclear bombs, will somehow get one if they don't already have it, and then they would use it on Israel. They would wipe Jerusalem, the city, off the face of the map. The only thing keeping them maybe from doing that would be the Dome of the Rocks, a holy Islamic site. So in some strange way, the Dome of the Rocks is a deterrent for any Islamic terrorists to blow up Israel and Jerusalem. But they could use it on other cities like Tel Aviv. They could destroy a lot of the nation of Israel. And then that would necessitate Israel retaliating against Iran and probably destroy Tehran and all of the major cities in Iran. And that would be a terrible thing. And then what would the U.S. do if Iran bombed the state of Israel? Would we retaliate against Iran? And then what would other nations do in reaction to that? So it's a very, very tricky situation, even today. And see, again, that's the scene that Americans fear, particularly in the 50s and 60s. And now we're beginning to become aware of this, and we're fearing that even today. Now, here's the fallout shelter example. The family is running into their fallout shelter that they have prepared, and see what happens next is that the family that owns the fallout shelter doesn't want to share it with anyone else. And here, this scene shows actually 2, 3, or 4 nuclear weapons dropped on Los Angeles, greater Los Angeles area. So this is actually a part of unfortunately, a mad scene, mutually assured destruction. Must have been an exchange between the United States and the Soviet Union. So they're going to destroy, decimate the whole nations. So that's quite a opening scene to that movie. But now, as Christians, what should our response be to this threat? Well, it's to be the way it's always been, that we are to trust in the Lord with all our heart and do not lean on our own understanding. In all our ways, acknowledge Him, and He will direct our paths. Jesus says that He will not forsake us, that He will be with us always. We're to stay in prayer. There's no guarantee of tomorrow under any circumstances. We always need to be ready for something bad to happen. You know, we see in our Bible, the book of Revelation, and we see all kinds of trials and tribulations. We see all kinds of bad things happen. And it's very confusing as to what the order of things will be. It's very confusing as to whether Christians will be around for some of that or none of that or all of that. It's very difficult to kind of chart a timeline as to when all of these things will take place and what form they will manifest themselves on earth. And so as Christians, when we read the book of Revelation, we know that there will be some really, really bad things happening on this earth. Due to sin, due to rebellion, and the judgment to come, some things will be very catastrophic and cataclysmic. And so as Christians, we all have a knowledge of this. we won't be surprised. Jesus said, don't be surprised when these trials and tribulations come. Look to God. Put your trust in God. Don't trust in man. We don't trust in the political process. We don't trust in chariots and horses. The Old Testament says to not put your trust in chariots and horses, or the means of war, or man-made mechanisms. Don't trust the political process. Don't trust the politicians to do the right thing. Don't trust the scientist to do the right thing. Don't trust the academics, the professors, the experts, so-called. I mean, we learned that from our experience during the pandemic, COVID-19, that you can't always trust the experts. The experts have their political biases, they have their ideologies, they have their philosophical assumptions about life and the purpose of life and the meaning of life and the nature of government and the purpose of people. And there's all kinds of philosophies and ideologies and politics floating around. And so you can't trust people. Ultimately, you have to trust in God. And so this is a great time for people to turn to God, as it is every time, but especially now, because, like I said before, we've had 70 years of a nuclear-free peacetime. We've had the breakup of the old communist nemesis, Soviet Socialist Republic, USSR. We've had 30-some years of relatively peaceful coexistence with our former communist neighbors. And we've had a great reduction in the number of nuclear weapons that each country has manufactured. But unfortunately, we've had a rise in radical Islamic terrorists, and we've got this rogue nation of Iran and other terrorist groups that are pushing to get nuclear weapons so that they can push these nuclear weapons out into the world as threats, terroristic threats. And so one of the things that Israel has done, this tiny nation in the midst of a sea of Islamic radicals, is that it has sabotaged Iran's nuclear weapons program a number of different times through different means. And we can be assured that they will do that if they think Iran is close to developing a nuclear weapon, because they don't want that existential threat so close to their own nation, whereby Iran can simply blow up Jewish people instead of just an attack over the border like we saw October of last year. Instead of that terrorist attack, they could actually lob a nuclear weapon over Israel and destroy millions of lives and try to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. So Israel is not going to let that happen. And if they were to try that against Israel, Israel would probably destroy the entire nation of Iran and any other nation that wanted to side with Iran. And they would use nuclear weapons. And so we would have this scenario that we saw in this video clip played out in some cities in the world. But even aside from the Middle East conflict, we might well see a terrorist rogue agent sneak into the United States and try to blow up a major city of the United States, like they did at 9/11, only on a grander scale and more devastating scale. And so this means we need to trust God even more. We need to depend on God even more and not think that we have the solution within ourselves. We need God's help in these modern times. And so we need to call people to repent of their sins, trust in the Lord while there's still time, and pray that God will put a canopy of protection over them as he has to his people in the past. I hope that's been a helpful commentary. See you back next week.